All right, Senator, we should be all set.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Senator Ruth Ward from Senate District 8. Today we'll be holding a meeting of the Senate Education Committee, and we will consider Senate Bill 108. Before we get started, I'll read through a checklist to ensure that the meeting that we're holding is in compliance with the Right to Know law. As chair of the Education Committee, I find that due to the state of emergency declared by the governor as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in accordance with the governor's emergency order number 12, pursuant to Executive Order 2020-04 and its extensions, this public body is authorized to meet electronically. Please note that there is no physical location to observe and listen contemporaneously to this meeting, which was authorized pursuant to the governor's emergency order. In accordance with the emergency order, I am confirming that we are providing public access to the meeting by telephone with additional access possible by video and other electronic means. We are utilizing Zoom for this electronic meeting. All members of the committee and elected legislative staff have the ability to communicate contemporaneously in this meeting through this platform. And the public has access to contemporaneously watch or listen to the meeting on Zoom or YouTube, and via phone by following the direction and links provided in the General Court website. We have provided public notice of the necessary information for accessing the meeting in the Senate calendar. We are providing a mechanism for the public to alert the public body during the meeting if there are problems with access. If anyone has a problem, please email remotesenate@leg.state.newhampshire.us or call 603-271-6931. In the event the public is unable to access the meeting, let me do that again. In the event the public is unable to access, the meeting will be adjourned and rescheduled. Please note that all votes taken during this meeting shall be done by roll call vote. Finally, let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their presence, please also state where they are and if anybody else is in the room with them during the meeting, which is required under the Right to Know law. I will call the roll. Senator Hennessy.
Good morning. I am in my home in Littleton and I am alone in the room.
Senator Ricciardi.
Good morning. I am home alone in my home in Bedford.
Senator Khan.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Khan is in Keene and my wife is elsewhere in the home.
Okay. Senator Prentice.
Good morning, Madam Chair. I am in my home in West Lebanon and my husband is in the house, but not in the room.
And I'm Ruth Ward and I am in my home in Stoddard and I am alone in the room. Please, let's start with the introduction of the bill, Senate Bill 108. And I hope that we have Senator Whitley here.
Yes. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Becky Whitley, and I'm honored to serve New Hampshire Senate District 15, which include the wonderful communities of Concord, Pennacook, Henniker, Hopkinton, and Warner. I'm proud to bring forth today SB 108 relative to school resource officers. The goal of this bill is to more precisely define the role of school resource officers in schools to enhance school safety while also ensuring that children get the appropriate support they need to lead healthy and productive lives. Brain science tells us that children's brains are still developing well into their mid-20s. Coupling this science with data showing that children with disabilities and children of color are disproportionately represented in the juvenile justice system shows the need for the guardrails this bill puts in place to reduce harmful exposure to the juvenile justice system. Specifically, this bill increases transparency around the responsibilities and performance of school resource officers. It also distinguishes between the role of teachers, staff, and school administrators and that of school resource officers. And lastly, it continues the state's ongoing commitment to addressing the behavioral health needs of students, including through the system of care provided for by RSA 135F. This bill is consistent with the recommendations and the spirit of the Governor's Lee Act Commission and of the Governor's 2018 School Safety Task Force. I'm happy to take any questions, but I will defer more technical questions to folks who will come behind me. And I will also say that the committee should have been emailed an amendment, a brief amendment that changed the effective date of one portion of the bill. But I will also say that I continue to work with stakeholders on workable language for the bill and hope to convene another stakeholder meeting to work on the language of this bill. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions from the members of the committee? Yes, Senator Ricciardi.
Good morning, Senator Whitley. Thank you for presenting this to us. I have worked closely with the chief of police in my town, and I have a question because you mentioned the Governor's Commission on the Lee Act, and that, along with the school superintendents and the administrators, are which developed a model SRO policy and slash, MOU. But that is very vastly different from SB 108.
Thank you for the question, Senator Ricciardi, and absolutely. So I did mention that we continue to work with stakeholders and that it's on that very issue. So I think folks, other stakeholders, appreciate the work to develop the model MOU, but feel that the guardrails need to actually be in state statute. So the continued work on this bill will be to review the model MOU that work and see if we can combine that work together to make sure it's in statute to protect everyone.
Anybody else?
Madam Chair, follow up, please.
Yes, please.
But the bill removes the local control. And do you not think that perhaps it's better left to the individual school districts and their local police departments? I feel it conflicts at times and contradicts a little bit of the state law with respect to that. I'm just a little apprehensive of some of the parts of this bill.
So I'm not sure if there's a question there. I don't think it conflicts with existing law. It really does build on a whole lot of reform to New Hampshire school discipline statute that happened last session, and it just builds upon that work. Local control is an important part of New Hampshire, but also protecting children and making sure that we have basic guardrails are also important. So I believe this bill strikes that balance.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Senator Whitley. So in understanding the bill, is it the Police Standards and Training Commission that has developed the model MOU?
I am not part of that work, Senator Khan, so I might defer that question to folks that are actually participating in the development of that model MOU. Perhaps Chief Skippa and folks from the ACLU can answer that question better. I have some understanding, but I don't want to present incorrect information on that work.
Great. I'll look for that. And I hear your willingness to continue the work. Clearly, some of the Lee Act recommendations around SROs are in other legislation. So I sense your willingness to try to extend that work with other parties working on it.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Prentice?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Senator Whitley, good morning. And just for a point of clarity, it sounds like from what I'm hearing that you have your bill, which requires Senate Bill 108, an MOU, and then Senator Ricciardi mentioned an MOU that is already either in place or in the works between law enforcement and the schools. Are there two different efforts around this MOU taking place, or is there one that's already in place and this would be new or add to this?
So thank you for that question, Senator. Again, I will defer questions about where the work on the model MOU is. I don't know if that work has been finalized, but you are correct. There is work to develop a model MOU, and this bill is, the intent of the bill is to get those guardrails into statute. So absolutely, there's a willingness to work together to make sure that the work is aligned.
Perfect. Thank you. And I appreciate, as had stated Senator Khan, your work to continue to move this forward and the discussion as well. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any more from the commission? Okay, I have one very quick one, and then I have another question. In the bill, I see reference to school resource officer and student resource officer. Are they the same, or was it just a mistaken print? The school resource officer, I have it on page 2, and then I saw another place that was labeled student resource officer.
That was likely, thank you for that question. That was likely a drafting error. We should consistently use throughout the bill, school resource officer.
Okay, that's on page 3, line 10, that's student resource officer. So that should be changed.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Secondly, Senator Whitley, in developing this bill, who did you work with? Who were the entities that you worked with?
So there are a number of organizations that have been working on reform to the juvenile justice system for many years. The ACLU, the Disability Rights Center, New Hampshire Legal Assistance. Those are the folks that I worked on in drafting the bill.
Did you work with the Board of Education?
No, I did not, but I'm happy to hear their input.
Okay. I think that's what I have at this moment. If there are any other questions from the senators on the committee, then I think we'll take the public input. Who do you have there?
Next, we have Moira O'Neill. I think I see you, but could you raise your hand? Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for allowing me to speak today. Good morning, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Hennessy, and members of the Education Committee. For the record, my name is Moira O'Neill, and I'm the state's child advocate. The Office of the Child Advocate is an independent state oversight agency, still in its infancy. And recently, the jurisdiction of the office was expanded by RSA 21V to all children's services provided for or arranged by the state. So thank you for the opportunity to speak about Senate Bill 108 relative to school resource officers this morning. I have submitted written testimony, and I'll try to shorten this for your benefit. The Office of the Child Advocate supports this bill in concept, in that if school districts are going to have SRO programs, they should do so with carefully crafted job descriptions, training, and cautious oversight and regulation. The reason that we seek such care with this role of law enforcement in schools is the growing body of evidence that indicates the opposite of their intended effect, which is a decrease in criminal and disruptive behavior. The stated intent of Senate Bill 108 is to enhance school safety and performance. In fact, there's strong evidence that there's an increase in, with the increase of the presence of SRO in schools, there's an associated increase in recorded crime and disorder. And so we might think that an increase in recorded crime and disorder in schools is just an artifact of law enforcement scrutiny. So if there are police present, they're going to see things and respond to them. And we also might expect that once criminal elements are uprooted and dealt with, that a school environment would be safer and more conducive to improved academic outcomes. However, that's not what's happening. So the higher incidence of recorded crime and disruption is seen as persisting for several years after SROs are introduced into school settings. A 2019 study that reported observations of cohorts of students who were in the 7th grade when SROs appeared in their schools actually found lower graduation rates and college enrollment. There's also a great deal of evidence that the presence of SROs in schools disproportionately affect minority youth and youth with disabilities. It's probably not surprising that researchers have also found that SROs endorse a more punitive approach to school discipline than school administrators do. They're not mean people, they just have different philosophies about responding to perceived bad behavior. One study compared the philosophies of SROs and school administrators and found that 83% of school administrators were more preventative oriented than the SROs that were stationed in their own schools. And this level of dissonance, it creates a tension around discipline practices in schools, and it can undermine prevention efforts of administrators. The presence of SROs increases the number of incidents that are reported to law enforcement. So in hearings before the Commission on Law Enforcement Accountability, Community, and Transparency last year, you may recall that there was a disagreement about whether police are arresting children more or just filing petitions more when they're encountered by SROs. And what they missed in that conversation, regardless of the language, was the fact that any encounter with law enforcement is a risk factor for delinquency and a path to poor outcomes. And furthermore, the associated expulsions or removals from school contribute to poor school performance and involvement with criminal justice, otherwise known as the school to prison pipeline. School exclusion, meaning suspensions and expulsions, next to the enforcement and law enforcement encounters, is one of the strongest indicators of delinquency and further criminalities. It's really important to think about that role. All of this information is really complex, and children's safety in school is a highly emotive concern. There's not a single SRO in New Hampshire who intends to disrupt a student's path to success. In fact, we know they believe strongly in the benefits of their presence. We've spoken with students who have good relationships with SRO. We've also spoken with students who felt targeted by their SRO. Certainly, we need more research to definitively determine the benefits or harm to continued SRO presence in school settings. The data collection required of Senate Bill 108 will help clarify exactly what's happening in New Hampshire schools compared to the rest of the country. However, what's abundantly evident in the information that we have now is the need for this clearly defined policy and procedure for the role of the SRO. New Hampshire has until now neglected to establish universal expectations. So on this, we agree and support Senate Bill 108 in that it would establish clear expectations as those being outlined at the recommendation of the Commission on Law Enforcement Accountability, Community, and Transparency. I do understand that there is a model MOU, a draft of it that's available on the Police Standards website. This bill would codify the need for using either that model or some variation of it. We want to have clear role definition, important training requirements for those working closely with children, the more disruptive of whom often have deeply rooted trauma experiences. So for this bill, we have a couple of suggestions, 3 in fact. The first one in section 2, school resource offices, amending RSA 18611. This is item 10 on line 1, page 2. There's a requirement of certification and training. We recommend specific training content that includes neuroscience, so that's understanding brain development and approaches to interacting with children and adolescents at different stages of their brain growth. Also content on developmental differences, which means understanding the stages and the associated developmental tasks in social and emotional development. There are certain tasks which cause children to be, to challenge authority. We need to understand that when we're interacting with them. Mental health content, so that we understand the differences in how children present when they're affected by anxiety or depression or psychosis or other problems. Content in trauma, the impact of which of an executive function, attention, emotional processing, and arousal. Need to be aware of that when we're encountering children. Also content on demographic, gender, and cultural differences, including how children from different groups communicate. Information about juvenile law for law enforcement. This is around the likelihood of peer pressure and false confessions among young people. And then—
Excuse me, Ms. O'Neill, could you wrap it up?
Sure.
We have a lot of other people.
So
Thank you.
In the written testament, there's that. Also, we're also recommending that the part that requires a complaint process, that the Office of the Child Advocate be inserted in there as a place where all reports of complaints and investigations be sent, so that we can monitor on a statewide way for surveillance for trends and what's happening with SROs. And then also in the data that's being collected, according to Senate Bill 108, it's data collected only in schools where there are SROs. We would suggest that the data be collected in schools that don't have SROs, so that you have comparison data. And we'd also ask that that data be shared with the Office of the Child Advocate also for oversight. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. If you have questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you, Ms. O'Neill. Any questions from the committee? Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. O'Neill, for testifying today. I appreciate your passion for the kids in our state of New Hampshire. One question I have for you, I'm a little concerned with the data that is being collected and made public, because in some of our smaller schools, especially here in the North Country, that may choose to have, say, a part-time SRO, if you were to disclose a student's age, grade level, race, ethnicity, sex, gender identity, disability status, in some of the cases, it would be very easy to identify what student that is. And I imagine a lot of students wouldn't want this information to be made public. Can I get your comments on that, please?
Thank you, Senator Hennessy, and thank you for the kind words. This is an important question. It is something that we also noticed. I suspect also that making public that level of identifying data may be a problem in federal law as well, in terms of confidentiality for students. So I think that as Senator Whitley is talking about it, making some adjustments to this bill may need to rethink what is actually made public. It's really important to collect that data. We need to know about it, and that's certainly data that can be shared with the Office of the Child Advocate, which is also encumbered with many levels of confidentiality. But to have someone that's overseeing that is important. But we would agree that that certainly children could be easily identified if that kind of information were made public.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the committee? Thank you, Ms. O'Neill.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Next, we have Chief Alan Aldenberg.
Chief, are you ready?
Morning, can you hear me?
Yes.
Madam Chair, thank you, and rest of the committee, thank you for having me and listening to my testimony. For the record, I'm Chief Alan Aldenberg. I'm the Chief of Police for the Manchester Police Department, and I'm testifying in opposition to Senate Bill 108. The language of this bill as presented will set forth a dangerous and unreasonable precedent within our schools. According to the New Hampshire statute, serious bodily injury means that any harm to the body which can cause severe, permanent, or protracted loss of an impairment to the health or function of any part of the body. Throughout this bill, an SRO's response to a situation would be governed by a substantial and imminent risk of serious bodily injury or harm to students, school staff, or the public. Passing of this bill would make it unlawful for an SRO to immediately intervene in situations that have not risen to the level as described above, but very well could in time it would take to notify a response from school staff. It is irresponsible to set forth a statute that would cause a delay in the quelling of a situation that could be handled safely and immediately by an SRO. A shoving match between two students can easily become a full-out brawl, involving several students at a time. It would take several minutes for an SRO to be notified and to have the school staff respond, causing an unnecessary and potentially very dangerous situation for all involved. The language of this bill would cause this delay due to the fact that the shoving match could not reasonably be seen to cause a substantial and imminent risk of serious bodily harm. So the SRO would be mandated not to intervene. Section 5 of this bill indicates that an SRO should not be present when a school official conducts a search of a student's persons, possessions, or locker in the absence of probable cause that the search will turn up evidence that the child is committed or is committing a criminal offense. This language again presents a situation where not allowing an SRO to be present creates a potentially dangerous situation. Section 8 of this bill again uses the language absent a substantial and imminent risk of serious bodily harm to students, teachers, or school safety. An SRO should not use physical force or restraint, including handcuffs, tasers, mace, or other physical or chemical restraints on a child. An SRO's use of force is already outlined in current statute RSA 627.5, physical force and law enforcement, stating officers shall use the least amount of force necessary. An SRO should not be limited in using any tool deemed necessary at the time of the incident. Our opposition to this bill is about safety, and that should be the main focus. There is a false narrative taking place where SROs are unjustly using their police powers within the school system against juveniles. This could not be further from the truth, as our belief in the SRO program stems from a more cooperative than not relationship between the SRO, students, parents, and the district. The relationship built between SROs and students throughout the years in New Hampshire are valuable and what we should be striving to create more of. The focus needs to shift from the idea that SRO's only purpose is to enforce laws and more what they actually accomplish in the school and for our communities. I'd like to reiterate that the language used in this bill would cause a more unsafe situation in our schools and will hinder SRO's effectiveness to help in providing a safe environment for our students. The purpose of this bill is said to enhance school safety and performance by increasing transparency around the responsibilities and performance of SROs, distinguishing the roles of teachers, staff, and school administrators from that of resource officers, and continuing the state's commitment to behavioral health needs of the students, including the system of care under RSA 135F. It is our belief that the above can all be accomplished at the local level between the school district and police department outlined within their MOUs. It is impossible to compare school district, police department relationships of a city such as Manchester with that of much smaller towns and communities within our state, thus making the MOU regulations at the local level even more important than before. As a point of reference, the City of Manchester has 9 SROs who are part of high school and middle schools. Their primary role within the school is to provide safety and security to students and faculty in surrounding neighborhoods. Additionally, they do in fact enforce laws and investigate crimes which may occur within or around the school. They also assist school administration when necessary to ensure the safety of the student body. Most importantly, Manchester school resource officers take tremendous pride in being part of their school family. They participate in programs with the school, often on their own time, and develop relationships with students and staff that are not only invaluable to the safety of school, but crucial to the development and success of the students both now and as they enter adulthood. I will also add that various programs that we participate within our school district, effective policing interaction with youth, the Mirror Project, Law Enforcement Against Drugs, Adverse Child Experience Response Team, also known as ACERT, and I'm also prepared to speak about the number of trainings that our SROs attend, and I'll leave my testimony to that pending your questions.
Thank you, Chief Aldenberg. Any questions from the committee? Senator Khan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief. I really appreciate the testimony both from Ms. O'Neill and from Chief Aldenberry. Really rich and I think helpful. Chief, does Manchester Police Department have an MOU for being present in elementary schools as well?
Let's back up a little bit. I was part of the committee through the academy. I was one of the chiefs involved in the forming of the MOU. That you see that was mentioned. That's on the PSD website. We do SROs at the middle school level have a secondary responsibility of checking in or monitoring or assisting the elementary schools where requested. And those are usually on the lines of our programs, Cops and Kids, those type of community outreach programs that our SROs will spearhead at the elementary school level. Again, very valuable.
Yeah, so the SROs are available to the elementary schools, or are they present in elementary schools?
They're available.
And you answered another one of my questions, but apparently you have worked on the model MOU.
I have, and I think that's the best path forward, because every district is different. And we have a very good relationship with our school district here in Manchester, and we've met with them thus far no less than 7 times about our MOU that we're still drafting to this day. So the appropriate thought and consideration is be giving to it to address a lot what the prior people spoke to as well, because some of their concerns are legitimate as well. Absolutely.
I see. So is the idea have you had an MOU previously with the Manchester School District?
Yes, it just needed to be, I think one of the prior people that testified, it just needed to be updated and given a lot more thought. And I think that coming out of the LEAC Commission has kind of ignited that again. And I think it's very important to finish that process out.
And have you put I'm sorry, Madam Chair, may I continue? Thank you. Have you put the Manchester MOU on a website so that has the school district to make it accessible, transparent to the public?
We will when it's agreed upon and signed by all parties. Absolutely.
But previously not. So the legislation that is, and the commission's recommendations to do so is going to change the amount of transparency the public has.
We would have no issue posting that and making it public. That way everybody understands, for lack of a better term, the rules of the game, if you will.
Chief, thank you for your work. I appreciate your answers and presence today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
More questions from the committee? Thank you very much, Chief Aldenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Before we call the next person, may I remind everybody that if you have a written testimony, please be sure that it comes to the committee, and maybe you can just give a summary of your testimony.
Madam Chair?
We all would appreciate that. Thank you. Yes. Senator Hennessy.
I don't mean to interrupt speakers, but when the 3-minute mark is reached, I will just say 3 minutes. And if somebody could, if whoever's testifying could wrap it up at that point, that'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next, we have Brian Trefry.
Brian Trefry, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Brian Trefry. I'm here to represent the Nashua Police Department. I'm a lieutenant in our Special Investigations Division, and I'm responsible for supervising the 3 school resource officers we have in the city. We have a SRO that works directly with each high school, and then the 3rd SRO works with the middle schools and the elementary schools, similar to the Manchester model that Chief Aldenberg just explained to everybody. Here in the city of Nashua, we have an existing MOU with the school district, which caters to the needs and demands of the student body, their parents, faculty, and the public interest. We agree that we should have clearly established norms and expectations, but as written, Senate Bill 108 is far too restrictive to day-to-day operations within the schools. There's some significant deficiencies in this bill that I just want to point out, and I'm not going to be redundant to some of the points that Chief Aldenberg just expressed. In section 2, there is no indication for how sexual-based offenses will be handled within the schools. Here in Nashua, we've had some significant issues with the student body having sexual relations during school hours. And for the school administrators to have final authority over the handling of a consensual encounter between a freshman female and a senior male student, I think is inappropriate, and the parents should have some say as to whether or not any criminal prosecution is resulted from that. You also have a portion of this bill that says that the school resource officer shall consult with the school principal prior to any questioning of a student. Well, I think there's instances where the student seeks out the SRO directly because they feel comfortable in confiding to the SRO, and they don't necessarily want the entire school to know what's going on with them at home. And obviously this bill would prevent that discretion on the part of the police officer and that confidentiality on the part of the student. You also have a portion of this bill that says a student's parent or guardian shall be contacted prior to the student being questioned as part of any criminal investigation. This section does not take into account whether it applies to victims, witnesses, or offenders. And it also doesn't take into account of in-home abuse. We have a large number of in-home sexual abuse that gets reported at school to school counselors, which then gets reported to the police department. And this bill basically is saying that we can't then intervene as police officers and speak to this child and get them to the Child Advocacy Center to provide in-depth details on the sexual abuse they're suffering from at home without contacting a parent or guardian, when oftentimes said parent or guardian is either responsible for or complicit in this abuse.
3 minutes.
Okay, so in closing, there's a lot of deficiencies with how this bill is written. And we agree that there should be established norms and expectations for school resource officers, but we are in opposition of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jeffrey. Any questions from the committee? I don't see one. So who is our next person?
Next, we have Jonathan Weinberg.
Mr. Weinberg?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, good morning. My name is Jonathan Weinberg. I am 21 years old and I'm a recently elected member of the Concord School Board. However, I'm here speaking in my capacity as an individual and not speaking on behalf of the board. Growing up, I witnessed the ambiguity of the role of an SRO. You wouldn't always understand what their position was. And all of us here, we want to do everything in our power to reduce the school to prison pipeline, but continuing with the status quo with limited oversight and standards over how municipalities can and will administer the SRO position, we will not be working to combat the pipeline. And while I believe we must do more in addition to this bill, I see this bill as an important step for improving transparency surrounding the role of an SRO and doing what is in the best interest for supporting students' academic adventures. Overall, I support this bill because I do think it's very important. I unfortunately cannot stay for questions because I have to make it to another meeting, but I thank everyone so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Weinberg. And who is our next one?
Next, we have Barrett Christina.
Mr. Christina.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. For the record, Barrett Christina, Executive Director of the New Hampshire School Boards Association, and NHSBA is speaking in opposition to Senate Bill 108. First and foremost, NHSBA agrees with the comments from the individual from the Nashua Police Department about the concerns of the limitations of questioning and speaking with students that school resource officers would have. A couple quick points I would like to make about some other specific language of the bill. There's already a memorandum of understanding that's required under RSA 193-D:4, paragraph 1C. And while the requirements of that MOU do not specifically include requirements relative to school resource officers, one of our questions is whether or not this MOU would be intended to replace the MOU that's under the Safe School Zones Act under, again, our RSA 193-D. On page 1 and 2 of the bill, where it lists what needs to be in the MOU, NHSBA does not have any specific objection to that. But rather, looking on page 2, sort of the section of the bill that would create the RSA 189-B, we have a lot of concerns and problems with those. I think that more than anything, the things that are trying to be accomplished in I guess part 2 of the bill are things that probably should be in the MOU itself. Who's going to be consulted after arrest, whether or not administrators or the SRO are going to be involved with questioning the student. We think that those things would be best left developed locally in the MOU. I believe it was the chief from Manchester said that, the needs in Manchester are going to be different than the needs in perhaps smaller schools. So we think that these issues and these comments and concerns and operations, if you will, would be best left developed locally and included in local MOUs between local police departments and local school districts. So again, we share the concerns that have already been expressed by those opposing the bill. So I'll wrap up my comments, but NHSBA is opposed to Senate Bill 108, and I'm happy to take any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Christina. Any questions from the committee? I don't see any. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sonia, who is our next person?
Jean Ruska.
Okay. Jeannie, go ahead.
Thank you very much. My name is Jeannie Haruska. I'm the political director for the American Civil Liberties Union of New Hampshire, and I appreciate the opportunity to testify today in support of SB 108. I'll start at the top. As Senator Whitley noted, this bill would implement recommendations from the LEAC Commission, of which the ACLU was a member. These include recommendations that SROs be certified specifically as SROs, and that MOUs between law enforcement agencies and school districts be public. And I would support the Office of the Child Advocate's recommendations in terms of what the SRO training should include. This bill would promote transparency and accountability by ensuring that MOUs are public and that they include a minimum set of considerations, including restrictions on an SRO's involvement in student discipline and how an SRO would be supervised. Parents should know what a police officer at their child's school will be doing, and specifically what they will not be allowed to do. There's been a lot of reference to the model MOU that has been developed, and it was in response to a recommendation from the LEAC Commission. I will note that we have concerns about the content of that model MOU, and that it gives too much latitude to SRO involvement in student discipline. And I also want to underscore that it is a model MOU. There is no requirement that school districts utilize it. We believe that it's important that even if there was an ideal, a perfect model MOU, it would still be important to enshrine certain guardrails in statute. And I would compare this to the legislation that was passed last year regarding student discipline reform, which again was not an attack on local control, but a legislation to create statewide criteria for student discipline so that there were those sorts of minimum guardrails in place. We share the concerns voiced by the child advocate about the impact of SROs on school performance. Research shows that SROs involve themselves in school discipline both directly and indirectly and can influence how schools respond to student behavior, even impacting discipline outcomes. Moreover, an encounter with a police officer at school can trigger anxiety, trauma, and fear in students, particularly students of color, impacting their health and academic performance. In the absence of clear guidelines, the role of SROs can easily expand over time without the explicit request of schools or awareness by parents. This expansion risks unnecessarily treating a student behavioral issue as a criminal issue or resulting in discrepancies with regards to which students SROs take action against. The involvement of an SRO, including any resulting arrest or consequence, should be consistent and not vary depending on a student's race or disability. I know my time is up, and so I would just underscore, we really believe that it is important for there to be minimum guardrails around the role of SROs in statute. We also very strongly support there being some sort of data collection around SROs. And so, but I appreciate the concerns about student privacy voiced by the committee and would certainly be willing to work with the committee on language on that so we get useful data without violating student privacy. So with that, I'm happy to take questions and thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. Ruska. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's go to the next one, Sonia.
Peter Llewellyn.
Peter Llewellyn. You are muted.
Now, can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay. This is my first time in front of a hearing, so you'll have to apologize, or I'll have to apologize if I do anything incorrect. Dear Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name's Pete Llewellyn. I live in Wolfboro, New Hampshire. I'm a lifelong resident of the state and have worked 21 plus years of my life as a police officer, with 5 of those serving as an SRO. I also serve on boards involved with child advocacy and have coached and mentored youth during that time. Today, I am here representing the New Hampshire Juvenile Police Officers Association, of whose board of directors I currently serve on. The NHJPOA, as we call ourselves, was established in 2019 as a result of Governor Sununu wanting an organization that could provide guidance and support to SROs, school safety professionals, and educators within New Hampshire. Once established, the NHJPOA affiliated with NASRO, National Association of School Resource Officers, whose mission statement encompasses certain similar values and goals to that of our organization. Today, I speak here in opposition to Senate Bill 108. The president of our organization, School Resource Officer Richard Bergeron of the Hollis School District, has electronically submitted testimony to you that outlines in detail the issues that we see with this bill. I'd also like to add that in October of 2020, the director of New Hampshire Police Standards and Training Council gathered a group of stakeholders together to form the SAU SRO MOU committee. Director John Skipper formed the committee as a result of the LEAC recommendation, as you know. Both myself and SRO Bergeron served on this committee, which was made up of stakeholders from the Department of Education, SAU level administrators, school principals, New Hampshire Homeland Security School Readiness, as well as himself, the director of PSTC. To summarize, Senate Bill 108 appears to want to limit police powers within schools. The duties and responsibilities in this proposed bill are already addressed in state law or case law, as we outline in our testimony. In closing, I would ask that you find this bill inexpedient to legislate, and I thank you for your consideration. And I'll take any questions if you will.
Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. Any questions from the committee members? Senator Khan. You are muted.
Yeah, I'm also not on the screen. All right, back. Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. Do you know how many school districts in our state are employing student resource officers?
That was one of the things that the New Hampshire Juvenile Police Officers Association was tasked with. We're still working with Homeland Security School Readiness to ascertain how many school resource officers are in the schools throughout the state of New Hampshire. So I can't answer that with definitive. I can tell you that we have had at least 47 people that have memberships within our organization.
Okay, thank you. And do you know if the first, it's good to know that you're working on the MOU. I probably have some questions about the process of the MOU, but Madam Chair or Mr. Llewellyn, if you know that Mr. Skippa is with us, I could save those questions for him.
Is Sonia, is Mr. Skip on the call?
Not that I see. If they are, could they raise their hand?
I can just proceed and just ask. You described, Mr. Llewellyn, the membership on the MOU commission, model MOU commission, or just committee that's been assembled by Police Standards and Training Council. So are some of the rights groups, developmental rights, racial equity groups in our state, are they represented on the development of that model as MOU?
I can't answer that. That would be a question Director Skipper would probably have to answer. I'm not aware of everybody that was involved in the development of it. I did attend 1 or 2 meetings. Of course, everything's online. And we, just like today, I don't have any idea exactly who was involved. So Director Skipper would be able to answer that for you.
Thank you. We'll probably direct that appropriately then. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn.
You.
Who is our next?
Jake Berry.
Mr. Berry.
Right. Good morning, Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee. My name is Jake Berry. I'm the Vice President of Policy at New Futures. As many of you know, New Futures is a nonpartisan, nonprofit health policy and advocacy organization that works to address behavioral health issues across our state, especially those facing children. I don't want to repeat too much of what's been said here this morning, but I do want to emphasize New Future's strong support for Senate Bill 108. As you know, our state has worked hard in recent years to increase access to behavioral health services for students in need, in line with our system of care outlined in RSA 135F. SB 108 stands fully in line with this effort. By better clarifying the role of school resource officers, SB 108 would help to keep students with behavioral health needs out of the criminal justice system and in schools where they can access the behavioral health supports they need. Trained and utilized appropriately, SROs can be a tremendous asset working with administrators to protect school safety while helping to connect students with needed behavioral health supports. This bill will not only better position SROs to help improve health and behavioral outcomes for individual students, but it will enhance the health and safety of the entire school community now and into the future. With that, we ask that you support this bill as ought to pass, and I am happy to take questions.
Any questions from the committee? Senator Ricciardi.
Good morning, and thank you for your testimony. I appreciate that you referenced that on many occasions the school administrators request the presence of the SROs during parent-student meetings, and they rely on the SROs to support the efforts of the school administration to resolve an issue. But in this bill, it discounts that fact. Do you have a comment to address that?
I would say, thank you for the question, Senator. I would certainly say that what we appreciate about this bill is that, again, further delineates and clarifies these resource officers' role in regards to discipline, in terms of allowing that to be left in the hands of the schools in order to align students with the behavioral health services they need, again, rather than getting into juvenile justice or criminal justice system.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Senator Khan.
Just a real quick one. Thank you, Mr. Berry. Has New Futures had any contact and role with the development of a model MOU?
No, sir. Senator, thank you for the question. Certainly, we have worked, closely with partners to do some advocacy work around these issues, but we have not worked directly with the development of the MOU.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Berry. Any other questions from the committee? If not, we'll go to the next person.
Michelle Wangerin.
Michelle Wangerin.
Good morning. Can you hear? Yeah. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Michelle Wangerin, and I'm the Youth Law Project Director at New Hampshire Legal Assistance. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today in support of SB 108. I just want to emphasize the importance of this bill and highlight how it dovetails with bipartisan reforms that were passed in recent years to bring New Hampshire schools into alignment with national best practices. Practices that both increase the climate of our schools and make them safer for students and staff. I also want to express some concern that there seems to be quite a lot of misunderstanding about what this bill does and doesn't do that I would like to clarify. 8 years ago, the General Court recognized that there is a fine line between developmentally appropriate youth misbehavior and delinquent conduct. It recognized that while youth misbehavior may often amount to a technical violation of the law, it should not always be treated as criminal misconduct. For instance, throwing a snowball at an unsuspecting classmate may technically be an assault, but I think we can all agree that not every wayward snowball should end in court involvement of the assailant. Back in 2013, the General Court implemented what is now RSA 169B6, paragraphs 3 and 4. Those provisions mandated that juvenile delinquency petitions are only appropriate for school-based misconduct that poses a true threat to school safety, or that the school could not remedy through appropriate general education or special education interventions. Similarly, just last year, the General Court passed comprehensive reform of school discipline, codified in RSA 193.13, and set to take effect this summer. That reform recognized that children do best when they are connected with their schools rather than disengaged from them. It created a laddered system of school discipline that prioritizes the development of supports and interventions for at-risk youth rather than long-term exclusion and isolation, a strategy research demonstrates time and time again only leads to riskier and often lifelong criminal behavior. What does this all have to do with SB 108? The state has put a great deal of effort into developing resources for children through implementation of the system of care under RSA 135F. Through the increased implementation of multi-tiered system of supports for behavior and wellness, and through an overall increase in awareness that students respond better to supports, interventions, and natural consequences than to punishment and shame. You've already heard a lot about Section 2 of this bill, so I'm going to be brief by saying this section is simply good practice. Having the bounds of a relationship as important as law enforcement presence in school set forth in a way that law enforcement, educators, parents, and students can understand is good for the community and even better for the parties involved who strive to make day-to-day decisions in a fair and equitable manner. I want to further emphasize that this bill is only designed to establish the guardrails of an MOU between schools and law enforcement. There's no reason why this would hinder the development of a model MOU, as you have already heard is currently underway. Section 3 of this bill simply codifies the role of school resource officers in a way that has already been decided is best for students in school districts.
3 minutes.
The law already says that juvenile petitions should be reserved for true threats to school safety. This bill simply says that students should not be arrested and taken out in handcuffs unless that type of threat exists. The law already sets the bounds of juvenile delinquency petitions for minor misbehavior that requires court intervention. This bill simply stands for the proposition that if law enforcement moves forward with such a petition, there's no need to also remove the child from school in handcuffs. In those cases, the responsibility for removal from school, if warranted, lies with school administration and the parents. This bill does not prohibit the use of court-based accountability in those instances. It only prohibits the added shame removal from school in handcuffs would bring upon the child. I would also like to recognize the concerns expressed by Chief Aldenberg and others that this bill would constrain the ability of law enforcement to intervene in physical altercations in the school. I want to say unequivocally that this bill does not limit such direct intervention to break up a fight. The only limitation is on formal law enforcement intervention in the form of arrest of the student. Similarly, it doesn't limit the ability of the SRO to conduct criminal investigations or question students. Questioning
Ms.
just
Van
must.
Geren, could you wrap up, please?
Yep, I will. I
Thank
will.
you.
And I think this is a really important point to respond to because you've heard a lot of testimony that about what law enforcement can't do under this bill. And it's very important to clarify that that under this bill, they would just need to use a probable cause standard to do searches. They can question students absolutely about criminal misconduct, but it needs to be done in consultation with administration and after notification of the parents. I think it's absolutely incorrect to say that this bill constrains law enforcement investigations in any way that you have heard. And so with that, I just want to express my strong support for this bill, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Do you have this testimony written down?
I do, and I was sort of working through it as I was testifying, and so I could certainly polish it up because a lot of it is in response to the things you've heard today. So I would be happy to polish it up and send it off to the committee.
That would be very nice. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the committee? Senator Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Wenger. And I think you're probably our foremost legal knowledge on students and the kind of legal representation that they need in our state. How do you suppose that the multi-tiered system of wellness dovetails with the role of the SRO?
Thank you, Senator Khan, for that question. I think it's really important. I think what we did last year in terms of school discipline is making sure that when kids act out in school, there's an appropriate response for them. You know, with the increased use of mobile crisis units, schools are going to be able to respond to misbehavior in a way that's developmentally appropriate and informed by that system of care that we've spent years developing, and in a way that is better for students. And relying on those crisis supports to work with youth in a developmentally appropriate way, as opposed to law enforcement response, is just going to be more effective. What you heard from Ms. O'Neill earlier is that when law enforcement is present in these incidents, kids are more likely to ultimately drop out of school. And so if we're responding to them in a developmentally appropriate way, understanding that kids do ridiculous things often, they get into trouble, and our jobs as parents, as educators, as clinicians are to help guide them onto a better path. And while law enforcement absolutely should play the role of keeping kids safe and responding as appropriate, and we certainly wouldn't want to, if they're the only adult in the room, we wouldn't want to limit their ability to do that, and I don't think this bill does. But if we have more effective interventions, we need to use those, because those are the people who are going to know how to respond effectively and are going to do it in a way that doesn't lead children to want to leave school or drop out of school or engage in further misconduct.
Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Van Geren.
Thank you.
And who is our next one?
Michael Skibby.
Michael Skibby. Mr. Skibby, you're on.
Morning. My name is Michael Skibby. I'm the policy director at the Disability Rights Center of New Hampshire. My focus this morning is on students with disabilities and the effect of SRO presence in schools on those students. I'm testifying in support of Senate Bill 108. The challenge here is how to respond to a variety of types of student behavior in a way that does more good than harm. There's an obvious risk for overlap when you have the actions of school authorities and law enforcement dealing with the same kinds of misbehavior. Research shows that when police are present in schools, the response to minor misconduct often changes. What was previously handled as a disciplinary matter may now be the basis for delinquency charges. For example, some studies have shown a significant jump in court involvement for such minor matters as disorderly conduct when there is the addition of SROs to a school. This bill would limit the role of police officers to traditional areas of law enforcement and encourage schools to keep the principal response to behavior that is not a threat to school safety in the hands of school officials, where it belongs. Doing this right has significant consequences for kids with disabilities. Court involvement for minor misconduct has significant negative outcomes for such children. It can increase recidivism, not reduce it. Chances of dropout and homelessness go up, and problems that last well into adulthood that affect public safety and strain public resources can continue. It's helpful to understand here why kids with disabilities are at such high risk for court involvement. Their social skills may be limited, leading to alienation from peers. They may experience a higher rate of school failure, leading to alienation from the school and negative associations with the school structure. They may have difficulty with handling structure and impulse control because of a disability. In addition, differential processing shows that often harsher responses are given to the same misconduct when the actor is a child with a disability than with a child without a disability. What I'm talking about here is the exercise of discretion by authority figures at school, law enforcement officers, prosecution personnel, and the courts, even those who run residential and corrections facilities. All of this makes kids with disabilities especially vulnerable to the negative effects of law enforcement contact and court involvement for minor misconduct. It increases alienation, it increases ostracism by peers, it changes the attitudes of teachers and other school officials towards students, and it weakens the connections with pro-social peers and adults who can provide guidance to a child who is at high risk of alienation from the school. When that happens, it hurts public safety rather than improves it. SB 108 would put modest regulation in place that is likely to limit those negative effects without jeopardizing school safety. I ask that you support it, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Ward, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Skibby. Any questions from the committee? If not, I have a question. Isn't it true that in the training requirements for an SRO at this point includes understanding and knowledge about disability and certain kinds of mental problems that kids might have, so that the SRO is much more prepared to deal with them?
I don't have much familiarity with that, but I certainly hope so, and that would certainly be helpful. The issue that does not address, however, is having a clear role definition for police officers so that they don't become involved in what would otherwise be a school disciplinary matter and increase court involvement for kids with disabilities when that hurts public safety and doesn't help it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Skibby, for your testimony. We have somebody else coming up.
Yes. Asma Al-Houni.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Al-Houni, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Asma Al-Houni and I'm with Rights and Democracy New Hampshire, but I'm also talking as a citizen in New Hampshire. I live in Lebanon. I'm speaking in support of this bill. I want to start off by stating clearly that I believe police do not belong in schools, period, and that this bill does not go far enough by allowing police to still remain in schools. But I am supporting this bill because it does restrict police powers in school, and it is better than what we currently have by removing the SRO. Also, I also want to state that the fact that we're using SRO versus police is very problematic. If we can't call them what they are, it's probably because we believe police and schools don't really belong together, right? I also think that we shouldn't leave this to local police or local towns, as unfortunately by making it a local decision, you are making the relationship between oftentimes the school board and the police more tense, because it could be taken that the local schools don't trust their police. So this removes that tension between the local school district and their police department by just making this on the state level. So by passing this, it would remove that burden, that possibility, and also as ACLU and many other experts have mentioned, it would also just be a bare minimum, a guardrail for students. I also want to mention, I hope you do hear me out, because there are some important things that have happened in Lebanon I do want to share, but just listening to the police chief and even some supporters of this bill talk about police stopping fights with children is terrifying to me. Even though under this bill they still can, we've all been through schools without police, and there were fights and people were able to successfully stop the fights. We need counselors to get to the root of the problem, not police officers, right? And the thought of police intervening in fights I've been through growing up sends terror down my spine, literally. Also, I can't believe I'm listening to police encouraging their presence in schools. They're telling you they're working with the Department of Homeland Security. Let's stop and think about this. These are children, for God's sakes, these are children. And no, police are not trained to deal with mental illness. That is not something they are trained to do. That's not their expertise. Also, I'm following in an excerpt in 2020, a report by a leading researcher of school policing, Aaron Kupchik of the University of Delaware, says, while there is no conclusive evidence that SROs reduce crime among students or prevent mass shootings, the research shows that the potential costs to students and communities are real. The available evidence suggests that the presence of SROs results in greater likelihood of the justice system involvement for youth, and schools with SROs tend to be higher rates of exclusionary school discipline like suspension than do other schools. Importantly, youth of color are considered more likely than white youth to experience these harms. And as we know, racism—
3 minutes.
Yes, this is the part that's important, that has to do with Lebanon schools, which is in our state. We know that having racism has an impact on our school district. This is true locally in my town as well. According to data collected by the Office of Civil Rights of the Federal Department of Education, in 2017, Black students made up 3% of Lebanon school district, and my school district's population, but 7.8% of in-school suspensions, 4.7% of out-of-school suspensions, and 6.2% of referrals to law enforcement. Let me say that again. Black students make up 3% of the population, but 6.2% of the referrals to law enforcement. In Lebanon, students have walked out to demand the removal of police from their schools. It is also important to keep in mind during a school board meeting most recently in Lebanon, the principal of the Lebanon High School said SROs are not used to discipline students, yet a student at our school was charged with indecent exposure for peeing on school property. So even if the school does not intend for police to be disciplining students, they sure are. So I urge you to remember, when you were children, you made mistakes, and that's okay. People should be allowed to make mistakes and learn from their mistakes as children in safety and not be criminalized for their mistakes. School is supposed to be a safe environment for students so that they can thrive, and you as leaders have a responsibility to ensure an environment that allows students to thrive without being afraid or being targeted. In order for students to really learn best, students should be in a setting where they can feel safe without the presence of police, right? So please vote yes for this bill.
Thank you, Ms. Elhouni. Any questions from the members of the committee? I don't see one. Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Mark Morrison.
Chief Morrison.
Morning, Madam Chair. How are you?
Very well.
Good morning, and good morning to all the fellow committee members. My name is Mark Morrison. I'm currently a lieutenant with the Londonderry, New Hampshire Police Department, and I've been a certified New Hampshire law enforcement officer for the past 22 years. But I'm speaking to you today on behalf of the New Hampshire Police Association in my capacity as president. I was also a member of the Governor of Governor Sununu's LEAC Commission this past summer that developed the recommendations dealing with law enforcement reform and professional developments. I was part of the recommendation to provide some guiding principles for SROs and support those recommendations today. This bill goes well beyond those recommendations and adds other restrictions that were not part of the LEAC recommendations. I have signed in having no position because although we support having MOUs, this bill would require numerous amendments and large redactions to be workable. I, however, cannot support this bill in its current form or spirit without those changes. New Hampshire enjoys a high level of service and professionalism from their police departments, and we as officers enjoy and have pride in being part of our communities. One of the best parts of our job is the opportunity to interact with the members of our community in instances that have nothing to do with enforcing a law or making an arrest. We enjoy getting to know our community and reinforce our belief and feeling that we are part of our communities. One of the most rewarding parts of our job is getting to know our youth and reminding them that police are always there to help them, support them, and keep them safe. We will forever be a part of the fabric of this state, and getting to know our community is critical to the successful relationships we have built and enjoy today in New Hampshire. I would also like to point out very clearly that we are in favor of MOUs in general and believe they can serve an important role. Current state law already requires that MOUs exist. We also believe, however, that MOUs should be designed by the local school district and their police partners who work together to provide the service they feel best fits their communities. All communities are different, and that variety demands flexibility to craft policy that fits those communities. This bill would also seek to restate what is already law and adds extra restrictions that may be difficult to capture in an MOU or should not be in an MOU to begin with. Suggesting an MOU be detailed enough to cover all of the suggested items would either be extremely difficult at best or require a novel to be written by attorneys and not community partners. MOUs should be guiding documents that serve as the basis of the interaction between the involved parties and not try to capture vast portions of search and seizure law, constitutional law, human resources, and other topics that are already governed by existing law or practice.
3 minutes.
Thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Do we have any questions from any member of the committee? Senator Hennessy.
Thank you, and thank you very much for taking my question. In some of the written testimony that our committee received, there was concerns that the word student is used to reflect that that every student at the school is a child. However, not every student in a high school is a child. They could be 18, 19, 20, I believe up to 21 years old. Can you maybe expand on what the concerns may be for adults in this the bill, the way it's written?
I think, thank you, Senator, for the question. And I think I would really defer to the people who were involved in the work group, that worked on some of these MOUs to answer those specific questions. But there's no question that, having adults interacting with kids, certain kids are different than others. There is certainly room, for a variety of responses. And the ability to respond as appropriate to the situation is what should govern, not, an MOU crafted by somebody who doesn't live in the community.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions from the committee? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Morrison. And who do we have next?
Elizabeth Leahy.
Elizabeth Leahy, welcome.
Hi, good morning. My name's Elizabeth Leahy. I am an attorney, and I'm also the former civil rights director at the Attorney General's office. I'm speaking today as a parent and as a citizen of Concord, and I am neutral on this bill. To start out, I'd like to co-sign everything that the woman from the Rights and Democracy of New Hampshire said. I thought it was all spot on. But in my capacity as at the Attorney General's office, I met with a lot of students and heard firsthand their negative interactions with police in their schools and about being personally referred to law enforcement. And so I've seen personally and professionally the effects of the early and persistent criminalization of children in their schools. It's been touched upon frequently, but there's ample data that contact with police results in increased risk of negative outcomes for students, including 3 times the risk of dropping out of school. And the presence of police in schools corresponds with disproportionate levels of exclusionary discipline for students of color, particularly Black students, as well as students with disabilities. And so against that backdrop, it's my view that all police should be removed from New Hampshire schools and replaced with professionals who are able to meet the students' social, emotional, mental health, and behavioral needs. That said, I understand that this effort probably needs to be undertaken at a district level, and that some districts, there's no foreseeable appetite to undertake those steps. And so given that police in schools are present day reality, I think it's at least prudent to have rigid guidelines with which they must comply in order to help protect the safety and well-being of students. From my perspective, it's important, however, that these requirements be viewed and presented not as best practices or as means to make in-school policing positive or better. There's no safe or healthy way to police students while they're in schools. The best practice would be to remove them. When that's not immediately possible, these standards at least try to ensure students' safety and well-being. So to that end, I would ask the committee to consider adding language to make clear that these are minimum requirements. I think the phrase is minimum guidelines that's been used, or guardrails, to protect students, and they're not a mechanism through which to improve or reform the role of police or school resource officers in school. Another point that I would like to make is I'm from Concord, so that's my perspective. I have we'll have a student in the Concord schools next year. Concord has been very upfront with the fact that the school resource officer is used in discipline, and then it also serves what they've called a triad role, which is law enforcement, educator, and counselor. And so I'd like the committee to consider adding a prohibition to the bill that would prevent police school resource officers from acting as educators and counselors. New Hampshire has licensing requirements for that, and police officers fall well below the standard that we hold other educators and counselors, and there shouldn't be an
3
exception
minutes.
to law enforcement. I'll wrap up quickly. I did also want to note the Concord data is consistent with the data that was referenced in Lebanon. In 2017, Black students in Concord were 9% of the population, and they accounted for 20.2% of out-of-school suspensions, as well as almost 19% of referrals to law enforcement. That was true. The disparity was true in the 2015 data, the 2013 data, and the 2011 data. During that period in Concord, there were 282 students referred to law enforcement, and 142 students were arrested based on conduct in school. Many members of law enforcement have testified today. Not one has addressed this local data and the effect of arrests and referrals to law enforcement on students, particularly Black students and particularly students with disabilities. There's also been no member of law enforcement that's addressed the national data associating police in schools with negative outcomes for students. Instead, what we've heard is concerns about limiting policing in schools, their ability to use force, the ability to interrogate students. These are children. They're children who are legally required to be in school, and we should not be policing them while they're there. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Leahy. Any questions from any of the members of the committee? None. Thank you very much for your testimony.
John DeJoy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is John DeJoy. I represent Waypoint. We are formerly known as Child and Family Services. I'd like to make a few points. We've been working on juvenile justice modernization and improvement since 2013. And we have worked on the issue of school resource officers since fairly early in that tenure. We introduced a bill back in, I think it was 2014, that required an MOU and a number of standards for police officers. The bill was, all of the guidelines were stripped out of the bill. And so the final bill just said there has to be an MOU. This bill before you today is consistent with that bill then. It was a good idea then. We think it's a good idea now. So let me just make a couple of quick points. There's really nothing nefarious in this legislation. It sets standards, minimal standards. And we use standards in many of our interactions just to identify roles. Who does what when. That's what this does. Without clear standards, there is a significant potential, as you've heard, for SROs to be drawn into situations that are routine disciplinary matters, matters that SROs are not intended to engage in typically, but could get drawn into without clear role delineations, such as this bill does. Police officers are certified, teachers are certified, but it's important to understand that SROs are not certified. There is no SRO certification in the state of New Hampshire that I've been able to find through research. So we have police officers in a role that there is no clear understanding of what type of training needs to happen. Now, I think they are getting training, but it's ad hoc and dependent on the individual department. Senator Hennessy asked a question before that I think really gets to the heart of the importance of this bill. Senator Hennessy asked, as I understand her question, was about data and the aggregation of data. And in small towns, data could get out that could embarrass or make uncomfortable students. Now imagine that same student is arrested in school and handcuffed and brought out. I find that to be potentially far more embarrassing for a student than the release of data, although both are important considerations. I also want to talk a little bit about NASRO that the representative from NHJPOA mentioned previously. NASRO is the National School Resource Officers Organization. And to be clear, NASRO does not set standards, does not have a certification. However, NASRO does publish what they consider to be essential elements of a school resource officer, including 3 years of experience, 40 hours of basic course training, 24 hours of additional training, and 160 hours of specialized police training.
3 minutes.
This bill doesn't call for any of that. But I do believe that if the representative talked about NASRO as an organization they belong to, we should be looking to that organization and trying to make sure that that is in our consideration of how we train school resource officers moving forward. We are always willing to speak with other stakeholders. We've not heard from any stakeholders until the last day or two, and we remain willing to talk to other stakeholders to try to make this bill the best bill it can be. But these standards are essential for the protection of our children and the clear delineation of roles between school personnel and police officers. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Thank you, Mrs. Joy. Any questions from the committee? Seeing none, I just have a comment in the printout from Mr. Skipper, who is the director of the New Hampshire Police Trainings and Standards. In section 13, where it talks about school resource officers, he talks about mandatory annual in-service training requirements for SROs to maintain their certifications. So I have to assume that there is a certification process I don't have the details of it, but somewhere there should be written down what that is in response to your question, not having found that they are certified. Any other questions? Pardon?
Was that a question, Madam Chair? Or?
No, I was just that you said that you couldn't find any certification requirements. And I just I just read to you from the section 13 on this, on the response from the director Skipper to the governor about what they were doing.
Understood. And I searched the Police Standards and Training website high and low. If there are certification standards, they're not apparent through that website.
Okay, it's hard to find anything on most websites, I think, so I can understand it. Anything else? In that case, thank you very much, Mr. DeJoy, for your testimony. Do we have somebody else coming?
The next person on my list is Madison Howard, but I don't see them. If they are here, could they virtually raise their hand? And if they're calling in via phone, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. And if there's anyone whose name I haven't called yet who wants to speak to Senate Bill 108, please raise your hand now. Representative Ladd?
No,
Representative Ladd.
Not Representative Ladd. My name is Carl Ladd. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire School Administrators Association. I'm sure that Representative Ladd is very glad that I'm not related to him. But on behalf of the School Administrators Association, I just wanted to voice our support of the concept of this bill. As has been mentioned several times, MOUs are inconsistent across the state, and the implementation of those MOUs are also inconsistent. We know more about the causes of student behavior now than we did when SROs were first introduced as a result of school shootings that occurred back in the 90s. SROs were introduced at that point for student safety. We know more about student misbehavior now based on mental health and brain development. We feel that it's very important that we do have training and guardrails. All school personnel who interact and intervene with students are trained, and continued education for recertification is required. We do feel that sections of this bill could be refined, but overall, we feel that it's really important that we have a set of clear statewide expectations and guidelines for anyone who's working in our schools with our students. With that, I will ask if there are any questions. Other than that, thank you very much, Madam Chair, for taking my testimony.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ladd. Any questions from the committee members? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
I don't see any other hands raised at this time, Senator Ward.
Senator Khan.
You're muted.
You're muted.
See that. Is somebody from the Department of Education available? I ask that because there is a certain amount of data collection that does occur annually. I wonder how they have given some thought to how thorough that data collection is, and any reflections they have about the process of collecting the records from school districts as regards violence in schools and cases handled by SROs.
Somebody is supposed to be on the call. Diana Fenton couldn't be here, but she sent somebody else. Let me see if I can find her name. You should know who she is. So.
We do
check to
have,
see-
Natasha Lupiani.
Yeah, that's it.
Yes, thank you. I had just called Diana Fenton. She is going to try to hop off one of the House sessions and hop onto this one to answer those questions for us.
So Senator Khan, you had some questions?
I think, yeah, given what we're talking about, there ought to be
Here she is.
some input from the department, and I think it would be helpful for us to be enlightened. And hello, Ms. Fenton. It would be helpful for us, the committee, to be enlightened about the kind of data collection that is done by the Board of Education, by the Department of Education, relative to school violence and the cases that involve school resource officers.
Which one of you would like to answer that question?
That would be Diana.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning, Diana.
Good morning, Senator Ward. So my apologies, I have not been able to successfully clone myself. So I was in House Education and quickly hopped on here. So for the record, my name is Diana Fenton. I'm an attorney with the Department of Education. The role the department plays in this area is somewhat limited. We don't, to answer the last part of Senator Khan's question, we don't collect data as to how many incidences involve SROs. We don't do it on that kind of granular level. To the extent we collect data, it would be in the, what's the law I'm looking for? The school safety reports. But we don't do it breaking it down by category of who exactly was involved. And I know that's something Senator Khan and I have worked on to but the department's role, again, in this area of SROs is limited. We have done some training, we have done some teaching. We are aware of the MOUs being circulated with SROs, but again, our role, I believe is somewhat limited in that capacity. But I'm happy to take any other questions that come up.
May I continue, Madam Chair?
Yes, you may.
Ms. Fenton, has the Department of Education played any role in the development of the model MOU?
Yes, we have. We were part of that discussion with police standards and training, and the committee, the task force that was put together. I was on that committee myself, so I had the opportunity to review the draft MOUs. I don't think I didn't weigh in heavily, but we were part of that discussion, yes.
That's helpful. Okay, I think you probably play a role in trying to bring these various parties together along with Senator Whitley, and I assume you'd be willing to do that.
I've always been willing to do that. Again, we have done outreach with SROs. They have an annual conference every year, and DOE participates in that. We attend that, and we usually present. And we were honored to be part of the discussion on the MOU. I think it's a fine line in terms of how deep we dive into that debate and how much we craft those MOUs. It's really not the department's role. It's for law enforcement to work out with the respective districts. But we certainly recognize that DOE wants to be a part of that discussion. We value the opportunity to do that. And we serve as an ongoing continuous resource for SROs and districts. And we think it's a positive partnership.
Thank you, Ms. Fenton.
Thank you, Senator Khan.
Did you have some more questions, Senator Khan?
No.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Fenton. Does anybody else have anything they want to ask Ms. Fenton? Thank you both for covering.
Thank you, Senator Ward.
I'm sure we'll be in touch at some point. Any other person who didn't sign up would like to speak? You don't see anyone?
I do
Okay.
not.
That will conclude our hearing on SB 108. Does anybody want to go into executive session? We're missing a senator, so part of me says we should not go in until we have all 5 of us.
Madam Chair, I think Senator Prentice should be back soon. Let me just follow up with Jess, and I can get back to you about
Okay.
what time Senator Prentice might be back on.
We can have a quick recess, but
That
I can
would be-
certainly have, I can certainly have getting out of the public hearing. We need to have a roll call for that. So.
Oh,
Senator, we can just
we could-
recess without. What did
I'm
you
so
say?
sorry.
What
Madam
did you
Chair, I was
say?
just saying that we could close the public hearing on SB 108 and then we can recess without
Okay.
a roll call for that.
Okay.
And then then there'll be a motion to go into exec, and then the whole voting process will start.
Okay.
Yeah,
Let's take a recess, 5 minutes, and we'll wait and find out if Senator Prentice can join us. Okay, we can have a break.
Senator Ward?
Look at that timing, Senator. Please go ahead.
Have you heard back from Senator Prentice?
So I just did, well, I heard back from Jess and I tuned in to see where energy was at. So Senator Prentice has successfully introduced her bill. She's just being asked questions by the committee members right now. We're hoping she'll be right on momentarily, but when I just flipped over to the different YouTube, she's being currently asked questions by committee members.
My gut feeling is that we can close. Or do you want to wait or take up what we need to do next Tuesday instead?
I'd be interested in what's on the agenda for next week before meeting.
Work on this, do our bills that we were discussing next week? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I think we should not act on today's bill just today. I'm just wondering, I noticed the calendar does have another bill added, and I was wondering if we're going to hear that next week or wait for other bills to come.
Yeah, I haven't heard, I just know one, but I haven't heard of any others. My question right now is, should we try to have an executive session or should we just close the hearing and adjourn?
Personally, I'd close the hearing. That's my preference.
Yeah. Anybody else has a strong feeling? Aaron?
I would prefer to adjourn as well, Madam Chair.
Okay. Then there's three of us. Shardy, what do you say?
Oh, Senator, you're muted.
That's fine with me.
Okay, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move that we
So
adjourn.
moved. Second?
Thank you. A roll call. Senator Shardy?
Yes, aye.
Senator Hennessy?
Yes.
Senator Khan?
Yes.
And Senator Ward says yes. Thank you very much. And as soon as we know anything about next week, you will hear about it. So good. Thank you all. Enjoy
Thank you.
lunch and the weather. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.